Your spirit waver now. The battle is at hand. Fight on with your heart before you. Someone, courage now to stand.
Welcome back to another episode of the Heroes Veritas podcast. I'm your host, Tim Bass, and today we'll be talking about the second foundational virtue. I have an admission. This is probably the fourth time I've tried shooting this episode, and I've not enjoyed any version of the previous one. So hopefully this is the one to get it. So today we'll be talking about the second foundational virtue, courage. Now, the last few episodes, we've talked about kind of what I want to do with the project. We've talked about what foundational virtues are, and we've talked about strength. And today's, we're going to get into courage. Now, with courage, it's a little bit more ethereal for people. I also believe that in our current state in society, we've actually taken a large step backwards from what courage truly means, and we've diluted it and created this new concept of courage to align with people who actually don't want to put themselves out there. And I'll get into that in a minute. But the biggest thing that you have to understand in context with Heroes Veritas and reclaiming masculinity is that courage and strength are, as Jack Donovan puts it, synergistic. You cannot have one without the other and still be functional. And the reason for that is because you could be the strongest guy in the world, but if you're cowering in a corner when the need arises, it doesn't help you. And on the flip side of that, if you have all the courage in the world and you're willing to do what it takes to step into a fight or a conflict or an issue, but you can't back it up, either they're not going to take you seriously and they're probably going to laugh at you, or you're going to, worst case, end up taking a beating or losing your life. So you need to have both strength and courage in order to be functional. And there's going to be varying degrees of both. And there's also going to be different times to use what and when. And that's where experience and wisdom will come into play. But from an amoral virtue perspective, in order to really be functional as a man, in the context of what we've been talking about, you need both strength and courage. Now, what is courage? Again, I mentioned a moment ago that to me, courage has become diluted. It's become perverted in a way. And the reason for that is because our society has in turn become much more cavalier than we used to. And when I was doing a little bit of research on courage, I was surprised to find so many definitions of courage when I was trying to get the definition to explain to you what it is. And so I had to kind of pull it apart and look at it. And one of the things that I found interesting was that there was I believe it was Merriam-Webster, it could have been Oxford, there was an explanation and a chart that described the literary usage of courage as a word written in the 1800s versus to now. And it was an interesting chart because in the 1800s, the use of courage literarily was so high. It was up on the chart, it was at its peak. And then from there, it just started to decline. And it continued to decline until the early 1900s. And then it started to get a little bit of a rise, plateaued. And then around the 1960s, again, it rose a little bit more, and then it plateaued. And then it rose considerably in the late 1900s to early 2000s and continued to rise all the way to where we are today. So you had this kind of weird dip and then a large rise. And I couldn't find a whole lot of research as to why that was. And I started thinking about it in correlatives to that time period. And I started thinking about my definition of courage as it aligns to Heroes Veritas. Now, for me, courage is the action in the presence of fear, of loss, or risk of life, limb, or status. That is how I define it. What I mean by that is in order to have courage, there has to be a risk of loss to you personally. That risk of loss is a non-negotiable for courage to me. If there's no risk of loss, then it's not courageous. There's a great line from a movie that I absolutely love called The Last Witch Hunter with Vin Diesel. And he's in a bar fight with the antagonist. I apologize. The antagonist says, it doesn't take a whole lot of balls to get into a bar fight when you can't die. That epitomizes my view of courage. Like if you have no risk, that's not courageous. And on the flip side of that quote, if you look at where we're at today in society, keyboard warriors are, in my opinion, the epitome of cowardice, because they hide behind anonymity and no accountability, and they talk all the crap that they want, and there's no repercussions, and then their herald is courageous because they think that they're badasses and they're doing all this stuff. Well, there's no risk for you, so why are you crying? Like, why are you worried about it? So we have these two dichotomies of the definition of courage. And again, for me, I feel as though courage has been diluted, like many of our English words, into today's society to fit our feelings, to fit our emotions. And the problem is that when we start drinking our own Kool-Aid and we've sit in an echo chamber and we start listening to this rhetoric that doing things that don't actually have risk to us is courageous, we start to believe it. We start to see non-courageous things as courageous. And what I mean by that is, in today's society, we have people that speaking their opinion is courageous. Going against the grain is courageous. While there is a certain level of courage there, it's not really courage. And I like to say, if you're going to use that to say that person is brave or courageous, how do you then compare somebody who goes running into a fiery building to save people they don't know? How do you define somebody who saves lives under hail of gunfire? Like how do you create that spectrum of courage? Are they the same courage? Like do they both have the same amount of courage? Are they both that courageous? Or can we all admit that there's a different level of courage that is required for somebody to, say, get half naked, sit on a magazine, versus somebody who runs into a building to save somebody from a fire? Can we agree that it takes less bravery or less courage to be overweight than somebody who goes to combat? Like, I get really frustrated because we've used this word courage and bravery to make society as a whole feel better, because we no longer challenge people to do courageous shit. We no longer ask men to go be courageous. We no longer have that standard expectation of men to be courageous. We worry about their feelings and we say, oh, it's okay, not everybody's built like that, and all this other stuff to make them feel better. So we start redefining things they do as courageous so that they can still, it's the masculinity, participation award, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, we're giving away this "you're courageous" rhetoric to people who haven't earned it, because they'll never earn it, because they'll never put themselves into a difficult position to earn it. And that's sad to me, because then we lack the ability to actually celebrate the people that do courageous things. And if you don't agree with me that we have diluted courage and we no longer give men the opportunity to be courageous, and we no longer see courage the same way, just look at our military. Yes, it's a volunteer service. Look at our law enforcement or our fire department. They're all three of those lines of work are taken for granted. They are considered volunteer services, and therefore somehow they are less courageous for doing so. And like when I went in the military, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I was a great Marine. I was a shitbag, and I had a lot of demons that I was dealing with, and that's just the reality. I'm not going to lie to you. But I did join the military, and I knew I wanted to join by my junior year. I felt a pull to it because of 9/11 and all these other things. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I was sitting there going, I'm going to go be courageous and be a hero. No. But But the reality was that the way people received it was, oh, you must be too stupid. You don't have enough options, or you can't afford this, so you're doing that instead, or um, any excuse that they could, because they didn't have the balls to go and join the military. And so when I said I was joining the military, they had to devalue that choice. And that's how we do it now. We devalue true courage, because when you create an image that they have to hold up to and they can't meet that, it hurts their feelings. And so now we have to pull down that value of courage so that we can meet their level to make them feel better. And I think that's wrong. And I think that that's why men have become so passive, is because we no longer hold them accountable to being brave. We no longer expect them to be assertive. We no longer expect them to be courageous. We instead redefine courage to match the fact that they haven't leveled up. They haven't been initiated into manhood properly. And this to me is honestly a sign of women trying to initiate man. And that's something I'll cover later. And I'm not trying to bash on women by any means. They're an integral part of our society and of manliness and masculinity. However, I think I said it in last podcast, men cannot initiate women. Women cannot initiate men. It takes man to man and woman to woman. And what we're having is the definition of courage is being defined by women to define the actions of men. And it's creating a void, a gap. Because we no longer have a standardized understanding of conduct to meet courage, which has a real definition. There is a real definition. And instead, we've just created new definitions to align with the new social and social normatives to aspire to. So it's now courageous to go to work. It's not. That's what you're supposed to do. It's now courageous for men to wear dresses. Don't get me wrong. I don't give a shit if you wear a dress. That's your personal choice, and it's completely insignificant to me. But you're not brave for doing it. Why? Because people yell at you. People won't like you. People don't agree with you. People, like, that's not courageous to me. That's just you showing your opinion, which is just a standard. You should be sharing your opinion. You should be assertive in saying, this is what I believe. And if people don't agree with it, there needs to be a standard of conduct of, like, I just don't agree with you, and that's okay. And I respect you for having that opinion, because that's the world we live in. But you're not courageous for sharing your opinion. Now, if you told me he wore a dress on the firing squad and they said, if you wear a dress, we'll kill you, then yeah, wearing a dress is very much courageous. Like, that's a very different ballgame. But, like, I'm wearing a dress and I'm courageous because I just won't be accepted by some of society. Like, that's not courageous to me. If you're not accepted by that side of society, then you're not being courageous. You're just identifying who doesn't align with you. That's not courage. Not really. And so, in context of what we've been talking about, when we talk about being a synergistic virtue for strength and where it comes into play as men, is it's several fold. The first and foremost is assertiveness. If you don't have the courage to stand on your principles, then, to go back to coin a phrase, the man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. And we see that a lot, where men have just become so passive and so placated that they don't actually understand their own values, their own principles. And what ends up happening is they start aligning to principles that don't actually touch their soul. They don't actually align with their masculine nature. And so what ends up happening is things start to respond as a boil over to them suppressing how they actually feel and that passive nature. And they start having misplaced anger. They start having irritability. They start feeling depressed and completely disconnected from themselves and lost. Lost is a very common adjective or a description of how the common men feel. And that comes from that passiveness, because they're not vocal anymore. They're not asserting their needs anymore. They're not saying, no, I am man, hear me roar. They're saying, hey, I am man, please don't hurt me. What? Like, that's not how men are supposed to work. And I say supposed to because while the utility of man may be in question in today's luxurious society and the safety therein, the minute something happens, and I'm speaking specifically from a heterosexual relationship because I really don't, I'm not going to speak ignorantly of other things I don't know anything about. And we could always bring people on to talk about that on this podcast. But speaking just from my experience in the heterosexual space, if things go bad, no matter how passive a man is, no matter how placating or feminine or emasculated a man is, the minute something negative happens, an emergency arises, with the exception of maybe 10% of the time, like 9 out of 10 times, the first thing that's going to happen when shit hits the fan is the woman's going to look at the man and go, okay, now what? What are we going to do? It's the first instinct. It's the first thing they do. So if the case is, no matter how passive, no matter how emasculated a man is, when shit hits the fan, those roles become very clear, and it's the man that's supposed to go and protect. But he hasn't developed and intentionally created a courageous mindset. He's not going to be able to perform. He's going to retreat. He's going to retreat. And with that retreat, he's going to show weakness. And with that weakness, he's not going to be able to step into manliness. He won't be able to be initiated. And so when we look at courage in today's world, we've pulled the bar down for courage so low, but men biologically and neurologically are still up here with the need for courage, the need to perform in their tribe, that our day-to-day is to match down here, but when shit happens, it needs to be up here. And we haven't created a functional bridge to ramp them up to courage, right? Because you're not going to develop courage by constantly putting your life in danger. That's not realistic. It's not going to work. But there are low-hanging fruits that we can aspire to that give us that same fight or flight response, that same decision-making capacity, that same assertiveness that would be needed in a life or death situation by simulating it in debate. We simulate it in conversation. We simulate it in our groups of friends. And we've lost that because we pulled the bar down. So there's no need to conflict. We can be pacifists. We can avoid confrontation. But in doing so, we are truly disproportionately ruining our capacity to perform when it matters most. And so when I look at society as a whole, especially what the impetus and the point that caused me to start Heroes Veritas, that was one of the biggest things that I saw, was this spinelessness. And what I mean by spinelessness is you come to me and you say, you're wrong, here are my values. And I challenge it and I go, okay, I see that you have a different value system, but I'm going to respond to you with facts and logic. At that point, I went on the defensive. You came on the offensive and you said, this is what I'm sharing. And I went on the defense and I was like, I'm returning fire. At that point is when the spinelessness always happened for me in almost every conversation, with the exception of a notable few, which I'm so grateful that they exist because they were part of the impetus behind this project. Because with the exception of a few notable exceptions, and I just said exceptions multiple times, so I apologize for that. I'm just thinking on the fly. Most would return fire off of my defensive, conceding the fight. They didn't want confrontation. And so the way that they did that was they would start childish name calling. They'd start trying to bully me. They would try and attack my value, attack my virtues. They know nothing of me, but they have no other concept other than, oh, you said something that I didn't like, so I'm going to tell you I don't like it. Oh, he actually responded and it made me feel uncomfortable, so you're a misogynist, you're a pig, you're a piece of shit, you're a pussy. Like they would attack my character because they didn't have an argument solid enough to do that. And that is a direct result from never teaching them how to debate, never giving them confrontation, never teaching them to be assertive and courageous in the proper channels, in the right way. Instead, they're like, if you don't get your way, bully them. Because they're entitled to you telling them the right. And that's not the way it works. That's not how manhood should work. And so courage is not only the willingness to jump into the fight, but it's also, and risk, right? Loss, limb, and status, like loss of life, limb, and status. It's also the assertiveness, the brazen willingness to be assertive when you think something is right and everybody else is saying it's wrong. So there's that. I love the quote by Captain America that it says, it doesn't matter if the whole world, the news, and the politician tells you that something is wrong, that they tell you something that is wrong is right. It is your job to plant your feet like a tree next to the river of truth and tell them to move. No, you move. Because I uphold the truth. That takes courage. It takes balls. It takes a lot of spine. And not everybody's going to see it that way. Truths are based on lenses. Now, there's an ultimate truth. There's your truth, their truth, and then there's the absolute truth. Your truth is going to be subjective to your lens and your view, your side of the story. Their truth is going to be subjected to their lens, their side of the story, their interpretation. Absolute truth is what you can prove and is repeatable by other people from every side. There's no other way to take it but that side. That's absolute truth. And there's an absolute truth in everything. But if you don't have the balls to stand up for it, like the saying goes, stand for nothing, fall for anything, you will constantly be rolled over. And to stand up, it takes strength. It takes resilience, because you're going to get knocked down. You're going to take your blows. You're going to take your beating. You're going to have to stand up and say, like, no, I'm not moving. This is my principle. And you're going to hurt some feelings, and you're going to get shunned. And that's where setting the perimeter is so important. It's going to be a common theme that I bring up all the time, is setting the perimeter. Because if you don't establish who you care about and who you honor with their opinion and care and envelop their opinion to your heart, you're going to be constantly rolling boulders up infinite hills. You're never going to be able to please everyone. So you need to establish who you care about pleasing. So I'm going to step down and digress off my soapbox. That's how I feel about courage and what I feel is necessary to have courage and assertiveness and confidence and all these other things. But how do you develop it, right? Like I mentioned, like you're not going to throw yourself into a life and death situation every 5 minutes. So there's no way to do it. So how do you really truly cultivate it? And I started the list a moment ago and I got kind of sidetracked, so I apologize. But again, first, being assertive, speaking your mind. 2, trying hard things that scare you. You're afraid of spiders? Go find a spider exhibit and just put yourself in its presence and just force yourself to be inoculated with that fear and understanding that it's still a safe environment, but you're teaching your body how to manage and function in that state of fear. You don't like the ocean? Go to the ocean. You don't like being on heights? Go to the top of a building and stare off the side until you feel comfortable. These are psychological ways of getting courage. It's a way of proving to yourself that you can do it. The other thing that happens a third way that you can cultivate courage that's really low-hanging fruit is make small decisions. Just make a decision. Right or wrong, just make a decision. Where do you want to eat? Subway. Where do you want to eat? McDonald's. Just make a decision. Stick with it and go with it. And then make bigger decisions, bigger decisions, bigger decisions. You just keep doing that, and then you build on that confidence. When it's wrong, remind yourself, all right, don't do that again. Move on, pivot, micro adjust, change it. Don't sit back here and go, oh, I made another mistake and pull an Eeyore and feel bad about yourself and victimize yourself and like, this is why I can't do it. I'm too stupid. That's not the way to do it. It's just not the way to do it. You made a mistake, confidently wrong, confidently right. If you're confidently wrong, then you know that was the wrong decision. You can confidently readdress and go to right. If you're confidently right, then you know you got it, and that builds confidence, and that confidence generates the courage. And cultivating strength also develops courage. It's probably the easiest way, to be honest. Not from a psychological standpoint, but men generally feel more powerful when they're more physically powerful. They tend to have more courage when they physically feel fit, or they physically feel capable. Develop skill sets, go to jujitsu, go to martial arts, go to karate or taekwondo, whatever floats your boat, Krav Maga, like whatever floats your boat. Jiu-jitsu is one of the more fundamental, functional when it comes to like drunken people especially. But when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, just find something that works for you. And practice and get in there and get popped in the mouth every once in a while. Spar. it generates courage because you realize you're not made of glass. Like, these are real applicable things that are easy to do on a daily basis. Take an hour once a week and go do something that scares the hell out of you. Take an hour once a week, go get on the mat and roll with somebody. Get on the mat and fucking spar with somebody. 1 hour once a week, go to the shooting range if you're afraid of guns. That's how you develop courage. You get familiar. You start familiarizing yourself with, oh, this feels like fear. This is how I function in fear. It's the same thing that they do in the military. They put you in really messed up situations and they just force you to function, until it becomes a new status quo for you to be like, oh, this is normal. I'm used to functioning afraid. I'm used to functioning scared out of my shit. Like, but people are counting on me. And so in closing, I'm going to finish with this quote. And it's something that it always makes me laugh in its simplicity and its vulgarity, but it's absolutely true. Because I'm a perfectionist by choice. And what I mean by that is I don't actually have a proclivity to perfection, but I use perfection to avoid my fear of failure or being rejected. So I will work on something till it's perfect, not realizing that in reality it'll never be perfect. I just creating that as an excuse to be like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, and never release it so that I never have to fear being rejected or being bad. And the quote goes, sometimes you don't need a plan. Sometimes you just need balls. And it's true. It's absolutely true. Courage can get you a long way if you got the strength to handle it. Build the plan on the way down. So what I'm doing with this, I said at the beginning, I've shot 4 of these. This one doesn't feel right either, but I'm going to run with it. Why? Because I'm working. It's my 4th episode. I'm learning with you guys. I'm growing with you guys. I'm not trying to do this in an echo chamber. I'm not perfect. I'm not smarter than you. I'm not better than you. I'm trying it out and I'm going for it. And at the end of the day, it is what it is. So get out there, make a plan, start executing. Small shit will get you a lot farther than trying to take on an elephant all in one bite. Just make it happen.